guys, welcome back. We decided to hang on to Cornell and Wessel. Fascinating conversation last time. Lots and lots of nuggets of gold and information that I hope you guys could use in your own lives if you're in a blended family. But these gentlemen, they've got so much of experience, so much skill. And in their own life experience, I thought I want to bring them back to dig a little bit, delve a little bit deeper in specific scenarios that we can maybe address on your behalf. So I know from off-camera conversation with Wessel that he is in fact the dad of two adopted children, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, yes.
And what's interesting about this is that you have adopted two black children, am I
That's
right?
right.
All right, what are their names? If you don't
Daisy
mind.
and John.
Daisy and John.
Yes.
So, beside the fact that those are not black names,
Yes.
How did-
No. Let me say. So let me say their full names: Daisy Boitumelo and John Tando.
there we go. All right,
Yes.
a little bit better, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
And I think this is a question some people have because we don't know and we're ignorant and we make assumptions and we'd love to know. Isn't there a conflict of cultures when a white family raises black kids?
Yes. No, there is, and I think that's a very deep and difficult question to deal with. And you know, we were very clear as to prospective parents that we want to offer parenting to children, and we would like to have the experience of being parents. And I've thought about that question of their cultural heritage, their biological heritage, and the context within which we are raising them a lot. And I landed on the conclusion that we are offering them a wonderful life as parents that is a better life than the life that they would have experienced. And I have to respect the decision that their biological parents made to give them the quality of life and the parenting and the love that we can give them. We were very well supported by an adoption agency who helped us to understand that making a child available for adoption is a decision of love. It's a positive a decision that a person makes, often under stress, of course, and usually in the context of poverty. So if those structural conditions were not there, they'd likely not make that decision. But dealing with reality, that's the decision that the biological birth parent made. I wanted initially to offer my children a cultural experience that matches their biological heritage. And what I realized as my children grew older was that their identity is very much grounded in language. And we're a Afrikaans, kind of English, mostly Afrikaans family. So I've got two black children who are grounded in an Afrikaans identity. And they became much less confused when I accepted that. And I stopped trying to compensate for not being a black parent. It is an opportunity that they will have when they are older. It's a closed adoption, so when they are 18, to go and revisit their cultural heritage. What I do find difficult in the context where I'm living in Somerset West and in Stellenbosch is maintaining social networks that are diverse. That's been my main challenge. So the cultural issue I feel is less. It's less of a challenge for me at the moment. It's more just making sure that my kids hang out with me and my friends and colleagues who are black people, and that we are really normalizing black lives in a very white context in Stellenbosch.
I'm glad you actually went there because it was an obvious question to follow up on.
Yeah.
And I'm not ignoring Cornell. We'll get to Cornell because we're talking about other matters as well. But this is just so fascinating to me because it is fairly prevalent worldwide, but specifically in Africa, obviously. And I think it comes from a good place, generally speaking. You know, people who want to be parents, who happen to be white and can afford to be parents. And there are so many children who are not white who are kids of color, if you like, who need good homes. So I think there's a natural fit there, and I think it benefits everybody. But I think the wider, broader society has questions around it, which is why I thought I'll just invest. It's a blended family of a different sort, kind of, in a way. And you kind of go, oh, that's interesting, because here you're blending cultures, and how do you navigate that? How do you teach a blackness to a black child in a white household?
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that
Because
so-
let's face it, sorry, I mean, if you're
Yeah.
going to be totally honest about it,
Sure.
your children are not going to have the same social privilege that you have as a white man.
Yeah, I do think that's changing, and particularly in the context where they grow up. And I do think that South Africa is. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. They're not, and that is a hard fact to accept. Yes, they.
I mean, they may come home to you one day and talk to you about feeling like they were discriminated against in a social setting, in a school setting, or something like that, and there's just no way that you'd be able to identify with that.
No, there isn't. And one way for me to approach that is to really make it clear to them that that is not their issue. It is the person who is being racist to them's issue, firstly. And secondly, to have strong black role models in their life that they feel safe and connected to, in addition to me. So we are doing that. And I do think that's something that was quite important for me to learn, was listening to the accounts of adult adoptees who had reflected on their experience of being parented by white families, how harmful the narrative that there's no such thing as race was to them. To use a narrative that there's no such thing as race, we're all the same, to ignore race basically is really harmful. But in our family, we're really clear that my children are black children and we're white parents. We do say we've got different shades. So I'm kind of, my daughter's kind of chocolate. My son is more caramel. I'm kind of light latte, and my wife is more pink. So we do talk about our different colors.
Yes.
But we also are explicit about the racial dimension of that, and being clear about that, so that they know that really anchors their identity in who they can be. But they know they are black children in a white family.
How is it Xhosa? How's the Nguni? I'm assuming that Xhosa, but how is the...
Yeah, so their heritage is different, and I want to leave their story for them to tell one day when they're ready to do that.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go too much
All right.
into their heritage, but
How's yours? How's your Nguni?
The Ateta, the Akonda. So my Xhosa, I think is relatively okay. But I do model that to them, and they do have isiXhosa lessons, and they are learning. But again, I tried in the beginning to give them an opportunity to learn isiXhosa from people around them, carers, etc. And it ended up just confusing their identity, because we're an Afrikaans family. So grounding their identity in our family, and then that being a basis for their platform from which they can then explore, etc. I do think language is an important thing, though. I do think that it is important that they do learn a black language that they would, of their choosing, and they are doing that.
That's fantastic. It's an interesting blend, and let's veer off a little bit in that direction, because how do you look the different cultures in South Africa and the world, the different races parent differently, often out of circumstantial or habit sometimes, but circumstance. I mean, as you mentioned in a different podcast, sometimes it's just really circumstance why aunts and grandparents raise kids, because mom and dad have to go to work, they can't afford childcare. It's a necessary step that's taken. So they would have been parented differently in a black household compared to in yours.
Yes.
And I'm not just talking materially. Obviously, I'm assuming they have more than they would have had otherwise. But I would imagine that you have a different style of parenting that, say, a black man would.
Yes.
How does one navigate that whole thing? Because their peers at some point will have different stories to tell about what was and what wasn't allowed at home, or how they were spoken to, or how discipline was meted out, for example.
Yes, one of the mainstream TV series that I really appreciate is a series called This Is Us,
Love that show.
and there's a central character in that show who's an adopted black man as an adult adoptee. And he reflects on his life, and the show also goes into his childhood experiences of being a black boy in a white family. And he had the added dimension that his two siblings were biologically related to his parents, whereas he was the one who was not. And it's a fascinating study in the experience of being an adopted child. Um, I really learned a lot from that show. One of the terms that he introduced to me when I watched the show was this idea of the ghost kingdom. That is the perfect kingdom that you ascribe to what your life would have been like if you had remained with your biological parents. And we spoke a little bit about it in the conversation about blended families as well. The reality is, of course, very different. So the reality is, this is where we are, and how do we make this the most loving, warm, nurturing, connected context that we can. So I do accept that there's an incredible level of loss, and I'm aware that my children will realize the loss that they have had at some point. But I'm not going to try and avoid that. I'm going to help them to deal with that.
The reason why I went there, and maybe you want to jump in here, Cornell, the reason why I went specifically there because there was a scenario mentioned to me where you have a black man who is in a second marriage with a white woman. They each have kids from their previous relationships, having been of same race, say. And he comes with a different style of parenting. It's a little bit more disciplinarian. It's a bit harder than what the white children are used to, or his new white wife is used to. And this is given rise to conflict in their home because he's not used to the soft, permissive approach that she's used to with her ex-husband. How would one navigate something like that? Cornell, let me jump in here. How would you begin to counsel a scenario like that as a psychologist?
I think in terms of conflict, because I think conflict happens in every relationship. It doesn't matter, what the background or the culture is. And I think we are very poor at working through conflict. We start a conflict situation, and then it becomes so horrid that the two parties just leave. And now specifically, if you talk about this white lady and this black gentleman, the sense of how they sort that out, they leave it. And they think, well, we're just going to leave it because we are from different cultures, and there's no point in trying to sort this thing out. But every time you have a conflict situation and you don't sort it out, it starts to bring a divide. And that divide grows over time. And then later they become despondent, saying, we can't talk to each other because we just keep quiet. You just do your thing, I just do my thing. I'll leave your kids, you leave my kids. And actually, there's no growth. It's actually more of a deterioration between the two couples. So what I try to do to help the couples that come see me is to say, but when we get into a conflict situation, the best is not in that moment to try and stampede through it. It's saying, it seems that we have an issue, and by us talking about it, I've got no preparation as to the issue at hand. Let us just clarify, why are we fighting? And if we can understand why we're fighting, and we can say, right, let's take some time out. Because just for instance, if you get caught in a speed trap and the traffic officer says, Mr. Brown, you were speeding, and you're saying, sir, I don't agree with you because did you see that silver Merc that passed me at much faster speed? He's not going to get into a conversation with you. He's going to say, here's your fee, your boete, and I'll see you in court. And that means that in that moment, the conflict issue is not being addressed. It's left to be addressed in a situation where it's organized. Now, when you go to court, there's discipline, there's order, There's no phones that's ringing and interrupting each other, and people have to wait and to listen. But it's amazing how we don't take that same procedure and order when we have a conflict situation. So my suggestion is park the matter, go think about what went wrong here, and then let us come back in a more orderly fashion. But people don't want to do that. They want to rush in, and then it's not working out.
Because in this particular situation, Cornell, you have so many blends happening. You have a family blending, their domestic cultures same. You have cultures blending. You have racial differences blending. There's a lot happening in one household.
Yes.
And obviously the thing that we are most sensitive about is our children. And when somebody says something to our children that we don't like, this is what gets our backs up. And that's where conflict might arise. But you have a whole history as a black man, say, and as a white woman, say, where how you were socialized. And now you're suddenly, within a matter of weeks or months, forced to change that thinking or address that thinking.
Yes.
And that's a hard ask for anybody, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we have to realize what are we dealing with. And this fly's missing.
I saw that fly. I was going to say there's a fly. Because you've got it's a lot to deal with.
Yeah. So for me, I think there's no hurry that we got to sort it out in the next half an hour. And when people take time, it's amazing when people sort of like move away and they start thinking about it and they come back respectfully and orderly and then say, all right, let me maybe try and see if we can move through this. And I do think that when there's mutual respect, I'm very strong on we got to respect the fact that that person that's sitting across from me is not silly or stupid or doesn't know what he or she's saying. It's like when we say, I value what you're saying, tell me, why do you feel that way? So when we start to hear each other, I think we are very poor hearers. We speak a lot, but we don't hear very well. And when it's quite a thing. You gotta pay attention to actually hear what your partner is saying. It's not while they are speaking, trying to work on an answer, how I'm going to be a rebuttal to that. It's like, okay, let me hear you. And I tell you, when people feel they're being heard, suddenly they're like, he gets it. So I think that's something that people can really work at is, do I hear you and am I prepared to hear you?
I want to jump, thank you for that. I want to jump very quickly to you, Wessel, a slightly different conversation that came up in one of the comments section recently. It's a very specific question that again addresses what I spoke about in our last conversation, considered to be the nuclear blended family. And this was from a gentleman saying that there's just no way that he can have a decent, logical, reasonable, adult, mature conversation with his wife's ex-husband. You know, the two of them just cannot, they clash, they just cannot talk. But the ex-husband's presence in the child's life, their child's life, the ex-husband and his current wife, is a destructive one. You know, the ex-husband is a man who wants to be a fun dad, he wants to be seen as the fun dad, and there's a bit of guilt involved there. So whenever the child goes there, which the child obviously has to, and I agree with that, there's always an issue when the child comes back home, emotionally and psychologically, and he feels like the ex-husband is sort of doing this deliberately and destructively. And the question, I think, is how do you deal as a man trying to have a relatively peaceful life in your home? How do you deal with your wife's ex who perhaps isn't a reasonable individual? What are the steps that you take?
You're asking me.
I know it's a tough one, yeah, but I mean, is there any sort of guidance that you can give us on this?
I'm going to bring it back to my experience of parenting black children and being an adoptive father. You mentioned earlier that as a white dad, I'm parenting very different to a black dad would. And I agreed to that, but I've thought about it now in this moment, and what I agreed with is the term black and the term white being suitcase terms that have embedded in them culture, heritage, the experience in South Africa of what goes with those terms. Not the essential biological difference of having different skin colors, but the actual the whole package of being a black man or a white man. And I wanted to be just clear about that I'm also a very different father to them than they would have had biologically, because I'm Wessel, just basically. And one of the experiences that I have to answer your question, that might be analogous, or might be an analogy to thinking about how to deal with an ex, is an approach that I've taken to explaining my adoption and the process of how we think about adoption to other people. And the way Renee, my partner, and I have constructed it is that we think about it as concentric circles. Like, we've got a very close circle, which is the two of us, our parents, and my siblings, and her brother. We would take as much time as it needs to for them to understand and to be on the same page with us about how we are parenting our children, because they're really important to us. Outside of that, I've got friends who are close friends. I'll take a little bit more time with them, but I'm not going to take too much of my energy to explain to them. Outside of that, there's colleagues, and then you get the point. You eventually get to the random stranger in the supermarket. Because a white family with black children is an anomaly in this context, in the Western Cape, often, I would get this weird stranger coming up to me in the supermarket saying, like, are you adopting a child, or who's that? What are you doing, basically? And the reaction is basically, well, mind your own business. Who are you?
Yeah.
But I don't regard that as important as the inner circle.
Yes.
So the analogy would be with another father is, for me, it's more important with my partner and our children to have clarity. And I do think that father is not on the edge. He's not the stranger in the supermarket. He's probably the next circle along. So it does require energy, but one can only go so far. You can't, and at some point, somebody else has to come to the party. It takes two to tango.
So if there's nothing you can do about it, as long as, I think what you're saying is, communicate to him how his child is being raised in your home by you.
And to the child.
And what the value systems are of that house and how you're doing it. Let him be aware of it, and he can choose to participate in that or not, because there's nothing you can do about his actions.
Yeah.
But at least maybe he'll eventually cotton on and eventually buy into it. It's really what you're saying.
Exactly.
Do you agree with this, Cornell? Well, what would you say? How does one bring that difficult ex to the table to have a conversation?
I think many people many couples would say that they have exhausted themselves to the point that the partner just doesn't, or the old ex doesn't want to heed or give in. And as I said in the previous conversation, sometimes the ex enjoys sabotaging whatever you're trying to do. And then with the family plan, what we try to introduce is that when we do get to a situation where there's just no more, there's nothing more we can do, or we feel like we're desperate, then we can call in, say, the counsel of a mediator that is court ordained, and it doesn't mean that the couple have to go back to court, but then both parties can access the mediator, and that mediator then makes a ruling and saying, having heard both sides, I'm making an injunction, this is how it's going to be, and you have to abide by it for the next 6 months, and we'll come back to the drawing board to see if it's working. So unfortunately, at some point, you have to bring, say, a legal component in. I say, let's try and avoid that. Let's first see if we can manage it. But otherwise, because it's so frustrating that this one party continually try and undermine or sabotage whatever efforts you're trying to do in your home.
Or sometimes they just think that their lifestyle or their decisions are so much better than yours, so they don't want to abide with whatever. They feel like maybe they are being emasculated somehow, that if they're going to abide by what you want, that you are winning and that who are you to tell them? I think that's often the kind of masculine, egocentric place that it comes from. But thank you for that. Let's finish off with another little conversation around maybe busting a myth or two around men's capacity to parent. I had somebody say to me fairly recently that men, and this is something that used to be true for women, generally speaking, people used to accept this more from women than they are of men, because, men, the traditional view of a stereotypical playboy, wants to have as many women as possible. But this person said to me that she actually noticed how men change the moment they become fathers, and that there's an instinct that overtakes men, most men, good men, decent men, that overtakes them when they want to dedicate their lives to the betterment of their children, their homes, their partners. And it happens at fatherhood. The moment they lay eyes on their first child, adopted or otherwise, that they start living their lives for that kids. And I think society somehow misses the fact that men are as determined to be good parents as we've always believed women are.
Sure. No, and I mentioned this in the previous podcast as well. There's there's no biological difference between father's capacity to provide all the care that an infant needs and the care that a mother can provide. It's if the father is around, if he stays and is in contact with the child. That's why in our work with dads, we work with expectant dads to get them to understand the value and the benefit to them as men of being involved in a child's life before the child arrives. It's much easier to keep a man involved in a child's life, whether it's in a separated context or not, but to keep a man and child involved in a child's life than to try and bring a removed father back. So I absolutely agree that there's a lot of invisible good intent that men have to care for children. And an interesting fact that science tells us, neuroscience, is that if men spend a significant amount of time with an infant, our hormonal system changes. We have more oxytocin in our system. We are more caring because we care more. So it's not, what you're saying, Bobby, is not only a psychological shift, it's actually a physical shift as well.
Oh, wow. That is very, very interesting. And I just have and I don't know what the issue is. I haven't thought about it well enough to actually put it into words. But there's this age-old, pervasive belief within society that, and like I said previously as well, the judicial systems in the world tend to favor mothers over the fathers, even though the fathers want to care for their kids and may actually be better at it. And now there's what you're saying here about neuroscience. And there's the anecdotal observations that men tend to have this shift within themselves when they see their kids. And they want only what's best for their kids and they work at it.
I think that sometimes dads withdraw from being a father because they don't want to mess it up, because they don't trust themselves that they actually can do it. And then the moms don't have an option to back out. It's like they just have to do it. And I think that's where the scenario came that they are better. And I do not agree that they are better. We need both, not the one or the other, because each one, mom or dad, brings a dynamic to that child's life that the other one can't do. So for me, it's so important that I tell dads that, they might put to me, but my dad, I didn't grow up with a dad, or my history. I'm saying, well, let's learn from that we do not repeat the same mistakes that your parents have done. And I tell dads, sometimes when you're with that little boy or that little girl and you don't know what to do, just stay. Just stay with him, because it's not that the child is like saying, okay, I'm going to scream that to such a point and then dad's going to run out of the room. It's like when you stay and you try to observe and you start to relax and you start to sort of like take in the moment and saying, okay, what's going on here? Let me try this. Because in that moment, that natural instinct would maybe supply with try this or try that. And then if you see it's working, it's like, I calmed the baby down. I can do it.
Do more of that, yes.
And I think that is the thing, is that dads don't trust themselves.
I think what you're saying, I've read somewhere, it's something to the effect of being from a home where there was an absent dad is exactly why you shouldn't be one. Everything that you feel that's wrong with you as a man because your dad wasn't present is what you now need to avoid for the next generation. Make sure that your son, your daughter doesn't feel the same way by being present. Final question for both of you. Do this, everything that you've just said about being a dad, being a parent, a father in particular, does that same instinct apply to your new partner's children that she has with another man? Is there the same kind of willingness, need, instinct that men would feel towards, say, a young child that is a new bonus child from a woman they've just married?
I mean, of course, I think it's easier with an infant to lay a foundation of bonding and attachment. You know, just through being in that caregiving relationship. I think also another point that you just made, Bobby, about the experience of being of not having a present father in your house. I often hear fathers say this, and there's lots of writing about this as well, that men often, when we ask them a question, what is your father's legacy? What would you like to take from your father, and what would you like to leave behind, if in terms of what the effect that your father had on you? And it's often either I want to, when there's an absent father, we often hear the story that I want to be present because my father was absent. Or if there was a present father, I want to model that. I want to be involved. But something I've noticed, which I think is really important to the debate, is that many men who did not have an engaged father learned a lot about caregiving from their mothers. So there's an intergenerational transfer of care, not only from a man to a man, but also from a woman to a man. And that many young men feel that they might have a lack and an inability to parent because they never had a father, but they learnt a lot from their mother, and they can offer that. And that is often what's lacking in what fathers are trying to do with children, is actually understanding how care works. So I want to leave that as the last point.
That's a very good thought. Cornell, last thoughts is a man who is entering a new relationship with a woman who's got kids able to transfer that fatherly instinct to her kids, do you think?
Yeah, I've got a good friend that married a lady, and he had an instant family. He never fathered children before, and then they had one of their own, and I think she was very helpful in coaching him and he was open to learn. I think a man that's open to learn can go a long way than someone that thinks he knows everything. So I want to say that I think all of us are able. I don't think there's one of us that's saying, I can't do this, but we have to risk it, and we will make a mistake, but just because we make a mistake doesn't mean we can't do it. And I think that's the beauty of life. It's like we're all learning, we're all growing all the time. We never get to the point of knowing it all.
Sure. Again, extremely valuable insight, gents. Thank you. If there's any final thoughts, you're welcome to jump in. But I think we've kind of exhausted this one now. This was really, really good. And you can look them up. I mean, all their details are in the comments below and on the screen as well. Comments from you in the comment section as per usual. If there's a particular conversation you'd like us to have around blended families, please drop that as well. But there will be more individuals who find themselves in very unique blended family scenarios. There are so many varieties of this that we'll tackle right here on Blended Agenda. See you next time.